So what are the ages, again, the range that you like to see or focus on?
Yeah, typically 8. I'll see a 7-year-old if they're about to turn 8, up until 35, 40. It's usually about max.
What does therapy or counseling with an 8-year-old look like?
It's a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean constantly looking for new tools for them to take home and practice. So it's a lot of worksheets. And I say worksheets like loosely. It's not homework per se, but it may be, for example, we'll do an emotion thermometer, right? With the different levels of like green, yellow, red. And so the different, green is happy, yellow is getting upset, orange is way upset, red is like explosive. So then you do coping skills for each level of the thermometer. And so things that they can take home and use outside of the therapy space, right? Because even if they're 8 or 40, one of the first things I tell them is, I can't work harder than you, right? So I'm going to give you these tools, but you'll
say that to an 8-year-old?
Their parent.
Yeah, okay.
Usually the parent.
Yeah.
But I will just ask them, to show up. And showing up usually in therapy is more so showing up for yourself outside of the therapy space, in my experience at least, right? Like we can come in every week and talk, and that's wonderful, right? We can meet you where you need to be. But what you do outside of the therapy room is 10 times more important because you're only with me for an hour a week.
Right.
Maybe every other week, maybe once a month, right?
Yeah.
You want to make
We're not miracle workers here, people.
Look, because if I had a magic wand,
right,
I would be constantly booked.
That's right. What do they, so I do think that's kind of an interesting area to think about. For me, my journey and story, I didn't hear about anybody going to counseling until I was well into my late 20s.
Yeah.
So I can certainly, as a parent now of 22 to 16, I could see very much a need for that type of support and care. So maybe we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what it's like and what do 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, and then you get the teens seem even more obvious to people. It's like, of course, when they get to 13, that's when they really need help. We all need help, but that is an interesting demographic. Yeah,
8 to 12 is a lot of working with impulsivity.
Okay.
That's one of the biggest things I see, like sibling interactions. Like I had, a client and maybe I'm seeing the daughter and she's telling me about a fight she had with her sister. Okay, well, what happened? Well, my sister grabbed me. Okay, well, how'd you respond? Well, I slapped her. Okay. Yeah. Did that feel like the right thing to do?
You ended the session then because there's nothing else to talk about.
Totally fixed.
Yeah, makes sense.
Valid, 100%.
Yeah.
I'd slap her too. No, I'm just kidding. So it's a lot of working on noticing when they're going to escalate versus getting in trouble for a reaction, right? Because a lot of times we are just reactive versus proactive. And if I can teach or even just help teach an 8 to 12-year-old, hey, what are you feeling when you're getting upset, right? What are the things that upset you? Triggers, as we'd call to an older kid or a young adult, right? Or any other client that's old enough to understand kind of the definition of a trigger. So a lot of it is just teaching them awareness, like self-awareness. And I don't expect them to be perfect at that. I don't expect that from 13 to 18 either, right?
Or 35.
Right. Sometimes a 35-year-old, just,
we still throw tantrums, even at that age.
Oh my gosh, don't catch me in traffic at 5 o'clock. I'm a whole different human being. But yeah, it is really just a lot of emotional recognition. It's physical too, right? When I'm angry, physically I'm going to feel that. When I'm sad, physically I'm going to feel that. So it's not always just the emotional/mental component. It is physically, what are you feeling? And for an 8 to 12-year-old, that's so much easier to get them to be aware of versus the emotions, right? So then when they've got the physical understanding, okay, then we lean into the emotional understanding of, okay, if I'm sad, I might see myself crying. If I'm angry, I might be sweating. I might want to hit something, right? Then you tie the emotion to the physical response. Then you can utilize a coping skill if it's a similar repeated trigger, right?
How long do you typically, would you see an 8, 9, 10, somebody, I'm thinking in my head between 8 to 12.
Yeah.
What would the kind of journey or process, and this is too, maybe another side of this conversation is outside of something traumatic or a crisis. I mean, this is just, this is in particular skills development and responsiveness and responsibility. So how long would you typically see a child?
It really depends on if we're doing weekly, bi-weekly, once a month. If I'm seeing them weekly, usually after about 6 months, you can kind of see a solid foundation and change have taken place. Now, it's very individualistic, right? Because every kid is different. Some kids pick it up like that and they've got it, they're good in 2 to 3 months, right? That's not to say things may come up right, later down the road, and they have a new trigger that comes along and they don't know, okay, is this something I can use the current coping skills with? Do I need something new, right? So anywhere, I'd usually say 3 to 6 months if, you're seeing the change, right? Now, if we're not seeing it, we may reevaluate and say, okay, what do we need to do different, right? These skills that we're practicing may not be working. Let me bring something else in. And so that's why I say a lot of it is tools and interventions, right? That I don't just give to the kid, I'll email to a parent.
Right.
Right. And say, hey, this is what we're actively working on. Can you post this around the house, or do you want me to print it out for you, based on whatever is available to them. And just, it's a lot of sourcing activities and things that they can see, right? Because if I tell an 8-year-old, tell me what happens when you're sad. Okay, well, they might not, they've been to school that week, they've played sports, they've played with their friends. It's a lot going on in life.
Goldfish memory at that point.
Literally. And so giving them something that they can write it down or use, to come back with.
And I guess I'm having a tough time imagining them engaging at that level, but just what do you do to build that trust, to build that connection, to build that, I guess, the relationship of it?
Yeah, it's a lot of, it's going to sound really silly, but I have a fidget toy box that I have.
I need one of those.
Games,
yeah, I've got one.
It's very tactile things that we can do together, right? Like one of my clients, we made sculptures out of clay with, and she uses it when she's anxious at school or when someone's picking on her. She looks on the back of it and it has words of affirmations for her. Bracelet making, like you name it, I've probably done it. Playing basketball, like behind the door. A lot of that is the rapport building, but also tied in with the coping skills and making it fun. Because I think if you ask an average 10-year-old, they're like, what do you think about therapy? Well, it's boring. All you do is talk. I don't ever want to hear that, right? Like I want it to be fun and interactive for them because I don't want it to feel like an obligation.
Well, almost like they don't even know they're in therapy.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really it's just going to see Kelsey.
Mm-hmm. Or an obligation, right? My mom makes me come here, right? What am I going to talk about today? I don't really care. Now, you have some kids, when I ask, how's school going, right? How are your peer interactions? How are your grades? Are you struggling with homework? It's like, no, I'm fine. So on the flip side of working with 8 to 18, I also do a lot of family work, right? And so occasionally I'll email parents back and forth of like, hey, do you have any concerns? Hey, do you want to come in and chat with me? And I do those check-ins. I do family therapy. Try to once a month if that's, again, an option for them. If not, I'll chat with parents on the phone in between sessions with their kids. And the kids up front know that, too. I set that expectation when we meet.
It's a partnership. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I think that's really important, too. They know that this is a partnership within the family system, right? And that's the system's approach to understanding that no individual exists in a vacuum on their own. And so the elements, that's really good. Well, I skipped the introduction. We got right into things, but I'm here with Kelsey Caprio and one of the licensed counselors here at Kardia, and where we're focusing some of our conversation, which I think applies to so many people that I know as parents, as kids in their stages of development move into that. And this is kind of interesting too, and credit to you. We'll come back to you in 10 years and see if you're still doing this. But a lot of counselors I talk to and have worked with over the years are like, I don't see kids.
Yeah.
I don't do kids. And so, which I know that's a very special gift and interest. So I love that you feel very much interested and drawn to that space and age. But maybe let's go back to the beginning a little bit, and I'll keep that conversation going. How did you get into this, and why are you drawn to that age group and some of the care that you like to provide? Yeah,
sure. So, to make a long childhood story short, I had mentioned, I think this in my bio when I sat down with Luke as well. My parents got divorced very early, like 3, 4, or 5 years old. And to their credit, I think they did the best they could with the tools they had at the time, right? But no parents are perfect, and no parent, will always do things right. And so there was a lot of just dysfunction going back and forth between house to house, and that leaves a kid feeling really lonely and vulnerable. And, I think my dad and stepmom, we've done a lot of healing work together, so our relationship is very sound now, right, that we're on the other side of what I've come to learn through practicing and through my own therapy journey as an individual. But I distinctly remember one morning, I think I was about 13, I went to school, and it had been a really rough morning at home, just like a lot of emotional abuse. That was kind of the center of what was happening, that I was subject to. And so I went to school and I grabbed my breakfast, went to homeroom, and I cried while I ate my breakfast. And no one was in there, but my teacher, And of all teachers, I had a psychology teacher, which for small town school was also like, what? We're learning psychology? But she knew my family. She went to school with my family, like my dad and my uncle. And so she kind of knew a history of our family. Obviously, she didn't know every single detail, but she told me, she's like, you're welcome to share whatever you need to share.
Wow.
Like, I'm a safe person. And I just continue to cry. I'd never had a safe person that wasn't family. I'd never had someone to go to say, I hate what's going on, or I'm not feeling okay and I need someone to talk to. And so she was that person, and she just listened. And then she also at the end said, you know, Kelsey, the one thing I've learned about therapy or psychology just in general is, you know, if we don't take time to process things and heal from it, we become bitter and burdened. And then that affects how we become in our adult life. And do you want to carry that with you? And I was like, well, no, I guess not. You know, like I'm 13. I don't know what to
If
say.
these are my options, then
right? These are the only two paths I have, right?
Joy or bitterness.
You know, at 18, I'm graduating. Well, actually, I was 17 when I graduated. Late birthday, but
I figured you just finished early. You're smart.
Not relevant. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
I immediately knew what I wanted to do. I knew I was going to school.
Wow.
Like, I knew all the things. You know.
Did you maintain a relationship with her through your high school? Was she a resource or?
Yeah, absolutely. She'd check in on me very frequently because unfortunately, one thing I've come across in my work with teenagers is school counselors are, I don't think, what we have the understanding of them to be, right? They're very brief check-ins, like, hey, how are you doing? Can I help you with anything? And it's kind of like a 5 to 10 minute interaction, unless there's like a big dilemma, obviously. And so a lot of times when you're going to a school counselor, at least in my experience, it wasn't an actual, what felt like a counselor in a therapy session of like, hey, I see you're struggling at home. How can I help? And I've, again, heard the same narrative in my previous experience. And so even in just that conversation with her, I realized I wanted to be a support system for teenagers that felt like they had no one, that they had to cry themselves to sleep, that they had to hide in their room to be safe, right? Like any just negative interaction you can think of between a parent and a kid or a teen. I wanted to be there so they could have somebody just to talk to and find out who they wanted to be too, because I don't think we give our young people enough credit that they can advocate for what they need and who they are as a person, right? Not in an assertive, disrespectful way, but just like, hey, I'm a kid and I'm caught in the middle of this. I don't want to talk about this, or I want to talk to someone, right? So giving them the ability to advocate for themselves. Right?
Use their voice, have a place to take it, be heard, be seen.
Right.
What do we all desire?
Absolutely, because what are we told as kids? You are to be seen, not heard. Sit down, be quiet, but be here. Behave. And that's really not how kids operate. Like my kid came home from daycare last night and threw his food on the floor, and I was like, don't rage, don't rage, don't rage. It's not that big a deal. We can clean it up, right? It's really not as big a deal as we make it out to be. And so it's like, in those moments where it is a big deal, I want him to have somebody to talk to and know that his parents, a therapist, his teachers, like those are safe people.
Well, you made a comment too that I think is worth digging into around not having somebody outside of family.
Yeah.
For me, it definitely was an spoken / unspoken rule of like stuff within the family stays within the family. That's a I think that's an obstacle a lot of people have to get through to not feel like you're betraying your family when you're telling the truth about your experience in your family.
Yeah.
But why is it important from your perspective to have somebody outside of the family system to talk to, even from 8 to 13?
They don't know. They don't know the person. Right, and it's not going to get back to them too. I think that was always my fear, because again, small town, I could go and talk to this teacher. Well, she could call my dad, quite literally, right? She knows my granddad. He's right down the street. Like the connections that the family, and again, it's different for a larger city, obviously, but I think even in just a family dynamic in general, right? Like I hear my family drama every now and then. I'm like, oh no, she didn't, right? And you're like, I'm gonna look at them a little differently. Like the next time we're at an outing, we probably won't because I'll forget by then. But you know, just in a general sense of like, you need someone who doesn't know who
objectivity
that is, right? And that is unbiased support. Like I am here to fight for you no matter what, right? Now the caveat to that is getting the trust of a teenager. Right? They're not going to tell me everything, and that's okay. Which is why working with the family is also extremely important, right? And so setting that expectation on the front end of, yes, you are the parents. Right? Any concerns you have, I want you to bring them to me, but this is your child's space. So I'm going to ask your child, hey, mom shared an email with me. Is it okay if we spend some time talking about it today? I'm not going to impede their space, but also I want to make sure that I hear their concerns And if the kid's not comfortable talking about it, okay, great, we'll come back to it, right? But I just need you to know that's something we put on the plate.
I'm aware.
Right. This is a goal we have to address at some point, right?
Do you have any specific advice or counsel for parents who are divorced with young kids? What would that process look like? What are some of the things to be attentive to and needs to pay attention to for young children facing that experience?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is looking for changes, right? Like if you notice your kid doesn't want to play a sport anymore and they love that sport, like a withdrawal or changing in hobbies that seem just kind of unusual, right? Kind of out of character. It's not uncommon for kids to not want to talk to their parents, especially about divorce, because
I'm glad to hear that.
Here's the reality. When I ask you, are you okay with how you're being treated by your mom or dad? And you're 10 years old, you're not going to go against your mom or dad. That's your mom and dad, right? Those are the people that provide a home and love and safety for you, even if there's an instance where there's arguing or yelling or discourse, right? So it's oftentimes not uncommon for them to not want to talk to you. And you can gently ask, okay, well, is there someone you would want to talk to, right? Should we find someone that specializes in kids, or, whatever the framing of the sentence be.
Whatever applies most to where you are right now.
Right, depending on how old they are. I can walk up to a 16-year-old and be like, yeah, do you want to talk to somebody? But I think just being there for your kid too, and remembering that they're in the middle of it and they didn't ask to be. And I think a lot of times when we're in dysfunction with each other, and especially if it's leading to divorce, that's absolutely okay, right? We're human beings. We're going to be hurt. We're going to be angry. We're going to be feeling all of those valid emotions during something like a divorce, but we also can't inflict that upon our children, right? They didn't ask that of us. They asked for loving parents who, even in the middle of discourse, you have to hide that from them in any way you can, right? Like, even though my parents would argue, I barely saw it. I knew it was there. I could hear the yelling, but I never saw them talk down upon one another, right, in front of me. Now, again, I could hear it over the phone, so I knew it was happening. But it's different when you physically see it. Because, again, those are your parents. You don't know whose side you should be on. You're on the side of this mom and dad, right? So I think just remembering that your kids are your kids, right? And you're an adult, but how are we managing our emotions in the middle of all of it? One specific tool I use with children whose parents are going through divorce is, it's like a worksheet, and it says what I need from my parents who are getting a divorce, right? And it has all these different questions of like, I need this or I don't need that. And it has spaces where they can fill in exactly what they need, right? I need less yelling. I need more communication. I need to talk to someone, right? And it has all these different kind of things, because like I said, it's really hard for a kid to come and be like, hey, I need you to stop yelling at each other.
Right.
And they shouldn't be put in that position in the first place, right?
Shouldn't have to.
We're human beings, but just in the sense of looking out for them, right, I think is huge.
That's a deep subject. Lots of questions come to mind about navigating that, or helping kids navigate that very traumatic, life-altering, unfortunately common experience. I think the other thing I'm curious about within the context of your practice is some of the tools that are parents that are maybe listening now with 8 to 12-year-olds or any age stage, but like, what are some of, because it's so funny whenever I talk to a counselor, and even hearing you, the things you say are simple and profound, which a lot of profound things tend to be simple.
Sure.
But it's like just naming some of those specific tools, I think, are really empowering to know that when I will be in that situation, there are things I can use too that help de-escalate versus escalate. But what are some of your go-tos and why do you use them?
Just like in terms of resources?
Yeah, and even tools and practices, coping mechanisms that parents can use with their kids when they're getting dysregulated or losing their minds.
A lot of it's going to be social emotional learning foundation. So like you can typically go and Google social emotional learning tools. I will use Teachers Pay Teachers. That's a website. You have a free box you can check. There are some you pay for.
Okay. TeachersPayTeachers.com?
Yep. Teachers use it a lot for educational resources, but there is a social emotional category.
Okay.
And so teachers who are wanting to implement that, like a calm down corner. Huge for some of my kids. Their parents will literally set up, and I've seen it in classrooms, a calm down corner where they
penalty box for kids, getting them ready for hockey.
No. It's really just a calm down corner in terms of there are fidget toys, there are pillows, there are puzzles, there are books, there are music tools, there are any coping skill that you can do within the confines of like a corner.
I'm having a tough time not imagining using that with adults. Instead, you're going to need to go to your calm down corner.
Right. I need you to walk away.
Yeah.
Go to the corner.
Go to your calm down corner.
They took a corner and said, we see an opportunity for that. Let's use it creatively. But a lot of different tools on Teachers Pay Teachers. And again, I'm a free gal. So I click the free box. They're downloadable to your computer. You can print them. Some of them you can even edit. So if it's like you want to create a schedule for a kid who struggles with time management, okay, great. You can go in and exactly type what you want on the schedule, print it, hang it up at home, right?
Keep going. These are gold.
Yeah, I use that one
Maybe everybody
a lot.
else feels more resourced, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah. What's some more I use? Between sessions is more catered toward like therapist, but they have workbooks you can use, like anxiety.
That's another resource between sessions?
Yes, between sessions. It's kind of like a library, right? You picture like a library. It has a search bar with all of the different categories of things you can use it for. So, and they have like adolescent versus adult type. They have some Spanish versions of some pages. It just depends on what you're looking for. That one is more for like my older like teenagers who like, well established in terms of like understanding emotions and coping and things like that. Not very kid friendly. So if you've got a younger kiddo, probably wouldn't recommend that one. But just a ton of tools on that. And I've bought a lot along the way. So I have kind of my own little library on my computer of tools that I'll use. But a lot of it is, you can go to Etsy as well and look up mindfulness worksheets if you've got a kiddo who wants to look at deep breathing. Yoga, if your kid's into yoga, or even a young adult wants to get into yoga, that's a mindfulness practice people use. There's all kinds.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the internet is like a vast place, obviously.
It's overwhelming, but if you know specific places to go, which we'll include those links in the notes from the video too, to point people in that direction.
Oh, yeah.
I think can be.
Etsy has everything you can dream of. And I get like 200 sheets for like $20 sometimes. So you think of hundreds of different activities, right? It can be applicable to any age group really at that point.
So are there any themes or trends that you're seeing, like as you're meeting with kids and families?
Yeah.
Are there some things you're seeing emerging that are unique or of interest that, just observations that you're making of like, man, this seems to be trending in a particular direction?
I don't know that I'd call it trending, but an interesting thing that I've seen. There's a couple different ones that come to mind that I would point out. One of them is, I think it's hard, just school. You talk about school, the commitment, the time, the just stimulation,
pressure,
the social conformity, like all of it is so difficult for kids. And I think a lot of times when a kid wants to come home and nap, right? A parent's like, get up, do your homework, do your chores, da 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 da. It's like barking orders. And that kid's like, I've been stimulated for 9 hours and you not. Why are you here? And there's a lot of dysfunction in that, how that is.
I feel like you were looking right at me when you said that. I don't know why. I feel very singled out and attacked.
I've never heard a married child say that.
Well, then don't talk to one.
But no, it really is like, am I checking in on my kid, or am I trying to be like that disciplinary, like super harsh?
What fear is driving me in that?
Yeah, because I think when I talk to parents, especially like my age and older, I would say probably 30 to 40-year-old parents, maybe even 45, are trying to rewrite the handbook, right? We're not trying to repeat generational trauma, right?
I want to do this different.
Yeah, I want to be different. I want to be an encouraging, supporting, loving, present parent who is not a disciplinary or like dictator, right? I don't want to bark orders.
Tyrannical, right?
Right. Like every time my kid does something, I have to ask myself, is this worth react? Like, should I? What's the reaction need to be, right? Like, again, even
calm down corner.
Right. Go to your calm down corner, Kelsey. And it's in my head at this point because physical corners, they're all taken with toys. But if I really sat back and looked, is that worth exploding over? Right? 99% of the time it's not. Now, obviously, if I have a kid being very disrespectful toward a parent, we want to talk about, okay, what's going on? Like, how are we addressing disrespect, right? And I'm not saying you go beat your kid, right? That's the things we're trying to rewrite, right? But what are the firm expectations, the boundaries that we have as parent and child? And a lot of times when I talk to parents, they're like, well, I'm trying to gentle parent. And I'm like, I hear that, but gentle parenting is also not permissive.
That's a huge distinction.
Right? Like, we're not just letting them do anything.
Right.
We're not saying no. You have to say no. You have to still be understanding and empathetic. And when they go against or when they are disrespectful, there have to be realistic understandings of what's allowed and what's not, right? I'm not saying you can't be empathetic. I'm not saying you don't have a space to share your feelings, because that's what I'm giving you.
Well, I think that's such a misunderstanding about confrontation in general, that confrontation is somehow always harsh or always aggressive. You can be very confrontational and assertive and not be aggressive or antagonistic.
Oh yeah, and it's like, even, in any relationship, how I communicate, how I see my partner, how I see my children, that impacts the dynamic, right? And one thing me and my husband have always told each other is we will not yell at one another when we're communicating, whether we're in conflict or not, right? Now, we might like yell across the house, like, can you bring me this? Can you stop doing that? Like, you're so loud, right? But in terms of like when I'm angry, I'm not going to be hostile and yell at him, because that doesn't achieve anything. It's the same thing we can do with our kids. I don't have to yell at my child for them to hear me. But am I on their level? Am I understanding what they're dealing with? And am I exacerbating any of that? Right? Again, not that I'm catering to my kid per se, but am I just looking at it from a different perspective? And am I teaching my kid to see it from a different perspective? Right?
Which takes time and patience and grace. I definitely feel like I used my authority and size to get control versus attuning. And being on their level, in their understanding.
I give the same example of, if you look at, it's going to sound so silly, but look at how Princess Diana talked to her two sons. What did she do? She would kneel, right? And she got on their level, and she listened to them. She acknowledged them. Now, that's not to say she probably didn't punish them at some point, but she was literally eye level with her children. And a lot of times when we think about like our parents, it was, I'm being looked down at, right? I'm having to look up to someone who I'm terrified
afraid of, right?
And respect is not fear. Those two are not, those don't cohabitate like that, right? And so do I want my children to respect me, or do I want them to fear me? And the dynamic will be completely different for both of those.
That's good. I really want to, you didn't use the word consequences. I don't know if that's been intentional or not. Okay. No, so one of the things that has been, as my kids entered in, consequences were easier when they were younger.
Oh, absolutely.
It was like, you can't have this brownie if you don't whatever. It's like, that's pretty easy.
Santa's watching.
That's right. That's even more creepy. That's a whole nother issue. But like when they got older, it basically everything was like, we're going to take your phone away. Like that was like the most powerful. It is really difficult. I don't know if you have any counselor feedback for parents as they enter into the teen years, where some of the simpler consequences just don't hold a lot of water or carry a lot of weight. Like, how do you navigate some of that or advise that? It's
difficult, and this is something I have talked to multiple sets of parents about, that I see their teenagers with specifically, like I'd say 13 to 18.
Yeah, that's where we felt it the most. It was like, oh, this shifted these.
Well, and if you look at it too, that age group, even the current 13 to 18, I would even say earlier, probably like 9 or 10 to 18 right now, have had full access to technology.
Yes, and my older two didn't have phones until they were,
older.
Yeah, much older.
And I would almost wager that how you approach them was different. Not like overall different, but just in the small sense of consequences.
Well, even the social influence or the social pressure for them was not as intense as it is for the younger two, in my opinion. I don't know if they'd agree. Well, they don't have anything to compare it to. So from my experience of observing those two groups,
it's different.
The intensity of where is everyone, what are they doing, where am I not, stuff like that. So yes, they definitely engaged with a different level of intensity.
And I think for parents, it's hard too, because they want to be empathetic. They want to be understanding.
Well, I don't want to be the bad guy either.
Right.
I don't always say no all the time.
What are they being exposed to, right? If I get on TikTok, I can diagnose myself with a mental disorder, right? Not to say that TikTok can't teach them things.
I hate TikTok.
But what bad things are we seeing, and what are they being exposed to? Now, again, I'm not saying don't give your kid the internet until they're 18, because they'll hate you for that too, right?
This is not tenable.
But, that age group has had sole access to technology and unlimited information. And that is overwhelming to them. They don't know it's overwhelming, I don't feel like, but just in a sense of like anything goes, right? So how do we limit All right. And I think it's very difficult. And I would actually wish there's research done on this in terms of like, is behavior different? Right. Because I can go, I think, I don't know that studies have been done on this, but like if you look at a show like Cocomelon, right, for kids, it's constant music and movement and it's very stimulating. And if you watch it enough, right, you will see your child slowly change in terms of their attention span, their ability to manage their emotion, which again, they're like 1 or 2. I don't expect my toddler to not have a tantrum, but you see more frequent tantrums because their attention span is less, right? And so it's literally changing the way that they approach.
It's wiring their brain. I mean, it really is wiring their brain. Yeah.
Right. And so what are we exposing them to?
Right.
Right. Like, again, I'm not saying I'm a perfect parent and haven't shown my kid the dancing
That's what
fruit.
I've heard.
Because
that you've been saying.
Someone lied to you. I didn't say that. But the dancing fruit is on for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening.
Which one is that? That's another show?
It's literally just dancing fruit with like club music.
Okay. Oh, wow.
It's a bop.
Disco dancing fruit.
Disco dancing fruit. Like someone took club music and they were like, I have an idea. This is going to be a hit. And my kid loves it, right? But he's not constantly staring at it, right? He's playing, he's bouncing in between. So that's the difference, right? Like something that's 10 times more stimulating. And so I wish I had a concrete thing to tell a parent, hey, this works. You have to do what's best for your kid. Right. And if you see that technology is becoming too much, okay, how do you limit it? Because now it's in schools, right? They have a computer,
they're on their
to do
iPad,
their
they're on the
homework, they
computer.
have an iPad, right? They have all the things.
Well, in different schools, some schools restrict access to their phones and some don't.
Yeah, right.
So
don't think there's any like perfect thing I wish, because if I come up with that, look, my
we'll be eating dinner at your house.
That's right. That's right. Yes, unlimited steak dinner.
That's right.
And I'm hoping that, again, like I said, research comes out, or there is some.
I'm sure there is, and
a tool that's created to help.
Andy Crouch had a book that I love called Tech Wise Family, and it was a real honest book about some of the boundaries and practices that he had implemented or attempted to implement. And he was honest enough to come back and say, this was the standard and this is how it really went.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's also, and I can relate to this, you're talking about how the technology and exposure changes our kids' behaviors.
Yeah.
I mean, just with myself, when I take a Sabbath from my phone or from technology, how I change. So practicing some of those things and modeling some of those things, at least so I can be less hypocritical when I'm talking to my kids and teenagers about some rhythms that help me renew my mind, rest, sleep better,
but I think that
be more
also
attentive.
Makes you human too.
Yes.
When we go to our kid and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do different because I've seen a change.
Right.
I try and tell parents, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to make every single right decision, because if you did, your kid wouldn't be here, right? Like that's ultimately, like, we wouldn't be having this conversation if you were perfect. You wouldn't have even walked in the door, right? Because you have all the answers. You've done everything correct. Your kid's great, right? But the reality is when we show our kids that we're human beings, I think they relate a little more to us, right? They see that that is a safe space to not be okay and to be wanting something else or struggling with something, right? Like, I keep going back to, how I'm trying to do these things with my kid, and he'll be 15 months in a couple days. So he's a little over a year old, right? We're in the thick of toddler. And it's like, this is crazy. I don't know what to do. If I breathe wrong, he might melt down, right? I just don't know. But if he does have a meltdown, I am there sitting on the floor saying, Mommy is here with you. Can I give you a hug? Obviously he's not gonna be like, yes, Mommy, no, you can't give me a hug, right? But I'm like, hey, I'm gonna offer you a hug. I love you, right? This will pass. It is okay to not be okay right now. He does not understand that right now, but he will understand it as he gets older. And if I practice it now, it becomes a habit becomes a lifestyle. And I take away a little bit of that rage or upset that I've lived with for however long, right? Yeah,
and it makes me think for us as parents, which I wish I'd known this earlier, that if that activity unnerves me at my core, then what's going on in me that needs attention or care, right? Which is, again, something I'm still learning actively.
Yeah. Oh, you and me both. Because even though I've been to therapy, I had a child and everything changed. I was like, I've fixed these things, right? And then I have a child and the emotion is just
unlock some different levels.
Woo! It's like 40 levels of Super Mario, and I was not ready. I fall off the track all the time, right? But ultimately, I just have to ask myself, am I showing up for him? right? Because I want him to look back and be like, Mom and Dad were here for me, right? Mom gave me the space, even just not because she's a therapist and has the tools, right? People think I have all the tools and like I'm a perfect, no, right? I'm still a human being. We're all human. But if I act like I'm a robot, what's my kid going to take away from that? You know, they have this thing called, what is it? I think it's like the sad mom face theory or the stoic
Still
mom.
face.
The still face.
I was
Thank
just
you.
thinking about this.
The still face
it's
mom
a still.
theory.
We can post that link too. It's a video. It's a project
Yeah.
of videoing a mother and child and some studies around how the baby responds
to the mother's
to the
facial
mom's still
expressions.
face. Yeah, if she doesn't react, it's really it's hard to watch, but it's very very telling. And the other thing I was about to bring up, we were on the same wavelength there, was the follow-up research on that, which was just examining attunement and attachment of, and how early on a child registers the attunement of their caregivers. But the follow-up research, which I found to be really encouraging, is you only have to get it right 50% of the time.
Oh, okay.
Like, so,
hey, we've done all right.
I mean, I think, I might be shy of that, but like the, how often you connect and attach and attune, because there's no way that you're not going to emotionally abandon them at some point or level.
Right.
But for them to feel secure, safe, and connected with you doesn't demand perfection either.
No.
It just that a little bit goes a long way in repairing that. So that's a really interesting. I love that we were both thinking of the same thing. But
yeah, because that's what I've told my husband. You know, and again, I think, you know, I don't know how like a dad approaches dadhood, right? But for me as a mom, you know, and I have a boy, so like he's reckless. But like every time he falls, I immediately want to go and hug. I want to be there. I want to be that comfort. And he's like, just let him fall. He's fine. And I was like, shut up. Like, I want to still be able to provide or offer the comfort if they need.
You don't yell, but you'll still say shut up. I feel it.
Yeah, it's a little hypocritical. Okay. It's fine. That's a 50%, right? That's a 50%.
Yeah, that's the 50%. Other side of the 50%.
But realistically, if I think about it, in 10 to 15 years, when he's going through like his first breakup or like someone bullying him, I don't want him to feel like he can't come to his mom or dad and talk to them, and has to hide in his room and has to, you know, God forbid, just have these depressive, lonely thoughts of like, it's
and be
the world
alone
against,
in it.
And yeah, exactly.
I think one aspect too of all this that I'd be curious to hear you talk about is the relationship that you would have as a therapist with the parents in that system. So your philosophy, kind of your mindset and your approach to, especially for people that may not have never entered in that territory, or maybe they did and had a bad experience. You know, there's all those things happen. But what is your approach within the family system when you're caring for kids? Yeah,
so the first initial time I meet, we all meet together. Not for the full intake hour, but at least for the first half. And that's mostly a formality, right? If I ask a 12-year-old, does your family have mental health issues in the past? They're not going to know that, right? Like they're not going to have that background information. So one, a parent is there to provide the fundamental information.
Context, yeah.
The context, right. And then it's also to set expectations, as I mentioned earlier, of like, you know, if mom has an issue or you're struggling with something, she can always email me, right? If something's going on at school, she can email me and let me know. So we are going to have that three-way communication, right? If there's something you want to say but are not comfortable saying, I can be the middle person, right? And so I let them know up front, like, hey, we are going to be working together, right? But it's also, what are your goals that you want for your child? And then I ask the child what they want for their goals as well, right? And we make those align as best we can, right? We work on all of them kind of cohabitating together, if you will. I don't know what that was, but it's fine.
it was effective, yeah.
Matches the sweater. So a lot of it is, you know, I've said this before too, and I think I said this in my bio. When I meet with someone, whether kid or adult, I will tell them I'm here for you how you need me, where you need me, and when you need me. So if you need me in the middle of the night, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Now, I might not answer till the next morning, but I'm going to be there for you in that way, right? If we're in between sessions, right? If it's a parent and you're struggling and don't know how to navigate something, call me, right? It's okay. I am here in any context that I possibly can be, right? Now, I may have 6 people that day, maybe in between, right? I will text you, right? What's going on? Give me some insight. How can I help, right? And I may not always have the answer right then and there, but I will get it at some point and be there, right? So I think it's not, like I said, just supporting the kid. It is supporting the family in terms of expressing your concerns, right? What have you seen at home that is working? Because I think when we talk about therapy for kids, it's not just the kids that we're working with, right? It is the parents.
Right.
And that's why we do family therapy. I've had parents sit and tell me, I have found what a trigger is, and I was able to talk about it, and it didn't escalate like it would have in the past. That's huge from a parent.
Right.
Like if a parent can do it after X amount of years, if they can learn and change and grow and heal,
yep.
that kid sees that, and that gives them hope that, okay, mom and dad are willing to do this, right? And a lot of that comes through family work that we do together, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know where I picked this up, but asking myself the question, what am I contributing? You know, being willing to ask if there's some things happening that I'm not okay with or I don't like.
Yeah.
Is it possible that I could be contributing something to that?
It's a self-awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do I need to do or talk about? But I do love the approach because I think that would have been a foreign concept to me if I was not aware of it as a parent, of this is a relationship, and the goal being that you're able to, as you all grow and heal and the system gets stronger, that we're not creating as much dysfunction, and perpetuating that dysfunction unknowingly or even unintentionally. Yeah. So that's all really good.
Yeah. I love it. I really do. And I've met therapists in the past who are like, I don't work with kids.
Right.
I don't like the family. I don't want to, no. To me, it, I think, is one of those places where you see a ton of change. And that's just hopeful, right? Because it takes so much courage to walk in the door and sit down with a stranger and say, I'm struggling with this, or I want to improve on this. And that's extremely humbling for me, right? I'm sitting down with parents who are willing to say, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Can you help me? I could not fathom, like, if I was in their shoes, like, at their age and doing that, right? Like, I don't know. Could I do that? Right? It takes a lot. And I always tell them I appreciate that. I appreciate the work that they do because they're doing it, right? It's something else I tell clients, and this is going to sound terrible, but I'll tell them I can't work harder than you, right? You're here devoting your time, your energy, your finances, right, as well. You should get something out of it, and that requires hard work, right? Change doesn't happen overnight. It's like I said, a habit. Habit turns into a lifestyle, but we have to actively be trying and actively be doing it, and not just try it one time and come back to me a week later. No, it didn't work.
Right, which you hear a lot.
It depends. Sometimes.
But I've heard people say that. Like, I did that. How many? I went twice. Okay, that's probably not enough. To alter a lifetime of.
Right, and here's the thing I tell people too. I'm not expecting, you to, like, if you want to, like, I don't know, use a new coping skill. I'm not asking you to use it every single day. Give yourself grace if you skip a day or you forget or you have a meltdown. That's okay, right? This is not going to be one of those things where you're perfect, right? Perfectionism has no space in there because it's unachievable. And so unlearning that we're not going to excel at every single thing we do, and it's okay if I mess up or if I fall backwards just a little bit. Am I willing to come back and try again?
Last thing I'll say, and that I think is worth pointing out too, is I have heard, not about you, I've heard people say, well, they're not married, so they can't really relate to my marriage issues, or they don't have teenagers, so they can't really relate, talking about the therapist. And hopefully what you're hearing from Kelsey, which I think is so amazing, is the wisdom and the practices and the emotional awareness and expertise applies to all human beings, period. So the connection is not around experiences, life experiences or stages, in my opinion, as much as it is understanding how we operate as human beings, and how human beings develop emotionally and relationally, because that really knows no bounds or marital status or age. So I think it's really interesting to hear you speaking with great eloquence and wisdom around, something, in terms of teenagers you haven't experienced yet, and yet, how people's hearts and minds and relationships work, and that's what's most important. Because by the same token, I can have somebody that's had all the experiences and been married and raised kids, and they're disconnected from their heart, and that's not going to be super helpful.
It takes both. Right, our mind and our heart. I saw this one time, I don't remember if it was on like Instagram or something, but it said, a lot of times we find it easy to invalidate our emotions because we're thinking, it just comes from our head, right? It's all in our head. Well, our brain is an organ, just like our heart.
It's a body function.
Listen to our heart. We listen to our stomach when it's hurting, and we do whatever we need to do to, recover or feel better, right? We respond. Why are we not wanting to respond to what our head is telling us, or our heart? If our heart's hurting, Are we listening? And if we're listening, okay, let's do something, right? Let's fix it. And so I found that interesting that the brain is an organ. Like we don't really take the time to think about that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's up there.
Right.
It's at the top.
Some
it's right.
separate component that's detached from every part of my being versus this
so
highly
tune.
Sophisticated and integrated.
Yes, like it tells me to physically respond when I'm sad, when I'm angry, when I'm happy. It like all of that comes from does your brain weigh like I don't know 5 pounds or something?
The
like
average
that.
human brain.
Yeah,
I only know the Jerry Maguire quote from Little Boy.
They're so intertwined, and I think we have to listen to that. We have to hear it and respond to it in a way that one is just respective of what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, right? And it's not always whatever stage of life we're in. I think anything can happen at any time, right? So we have to be willing and open to, addressing it.
This has been fun. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. Really glad you're part of the team here at Kardia, helping people heal so they can live with courage, hope, and freedom.
I love it.
Yeah, you do a great job, and I can tell you care a lot about what you do and how you do it and who you do it with.
Oh, absolutely. It's the best job in the world. It's not even a job, really. It's like a hobby.
It's hard work. I've seen it. I have a lot of respect for all of you in the counseling role. You give a lot of yourselves. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Great to be with you.
You too.